Welcome to our new series, Shires Health, in partnership with Southwestern Vermont Medical Center and Catamount Access Television. I'm your host, Matt Harrington, Executive Director of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Based on the popular success of last year's chamber telecast, we did plenty of them, and we did a lot of them focused on health and the community. And so with the success of that, we wanted to work with our partners, those already mentioned, to develop a new series to better communicate the regional health needs, challenges, and opportunities of the area. Southwestern Vermont Medical Center is currently initiating a comprehensive health assessment of the community. Joining me today is Rory Price, SVMC's Coordinator of Population Health, and we'll talk a little bit about what is population health today. We will discuss the hospital's triannual community health needs of the region, community health assessment process, which helps to understand the current health needs of the region and address priority health needs both within and outside of the hospital walls. And so really in the whole spirit and theme of this series, Shires Health, what a great way to start off with talking about the big picture of Bennington County of Southwestern Vermont and population health. So Rory, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to hop on with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Great. So for some of those tuning in on Facebook Live, you know how this works, but if you're new to it, you can leave a question or comment for Rory or myself in the comment bar, and we will try and get to as many questions as possible. I have a couple questions for Rory to kick us off, but this is supposed to be interactive and supposed to get your questions answered. So if you're watching this, give us a thumbs up if you like the show, and even better, leave a question for Rory on some of the initiatives that she's working on, and we'll be happy to get to them as many as we can today. So Rory, thanks again for joining us. Talk to us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? What's your favorite color? Those sorts of things. But really, you've been part of the Bennington community for quite a while now, but you're not a native. So give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. Yep. So I'm originally from Michigan. So I'm a Midwesterner at heart. I went to school at the University of Michigan for undergrad, and probably like a lot of people my age then, didn't really have a plan for my future, but kind of knew what I was interested in. And at the time, that was international health. And so I studied abroad in Ghana in West Africa and really enjoyed the experience, felt like, humanitarian missions, international health, that's where I'm going to be. It wasn't until my grandfather was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme, which is a pretty aggressive brain cancer, that I started to realize the sort of pitfalls and gaps in our own healthcare system domestically. So being with him through that process from diagnosis all the way through really made me passionate about sticking at home and making a difference here in the U.S. It seemed like the system wasn't designed for people to be able to navigate it easily. And so at the time I was interested in that, but I didn't really have a word to put to it. And the word that matches with that interest is public health. And so I started kind of poking around for what opportunities existed, and I found AmeriCorps, which is sort of the domestic version of the Peace Corps. And I was lucky enough to land a one-year position here at SVMC. And so I moved from Michigan to Vermont and gave it a try and just absolutely fell in love with the community, with the state, and knew that I wanted to kind of put down roots here. I did go back to Michigan briefly to get my master's in public health, again at the University of Michigan, and came back here close to 2 years ago to work at SVMC. First as our coordinator of volunteer services, and now as our coordinator of population health. So that's kind of what brought me to Bennington County. And I'll just say that Southwestern Vermont Medical Center, it kind of drew me in because I think that this organization is really at the forefront of a lot of just interesting public health measures that I'm not seeing in other states or other regions. So to be a part of it it's really great.
Great. And thank you for those kind words about our health system. It's very encouraging and helpful, I think, for our viewers to know that if they haven't heard it yet, which probably a lot of people have, we have world-class healthcare here right in the Shires of Vermont. we started the program by talking about the bigger picture, the bigger question, the bigger term around population health, and you alluded to some of that in your studies. Talk to us from your perspective and from SVMC's perspective. What does population health mean?
Sure. No, that's a really great question. And it seems like it would have an easy answer, but there's actually a fair amount of debate about what population health actually means and what actions it drives. And so from my understanding, population health is really looking at the health outcomes of a population and how good or bad outcomes are distributed throughout that population. And so the term population health has two words in it. So population, you can look at the broad population, which is what our community health needs assessment study is doing. You can look at particular patient populations, and SVMC does that as well. We take a look at how are the people that we're serving, how are they doing? And then within that, you can also look at different subpopulations. So how are particular age groups faring in certain health outcomes? And the word health also is a little bit of a loaded word. So population health doesn't only look at clinical care. We're also looking at, the holistic health of the person. So whole person health. How are they doing mentally, physically, socioeconomically? So in terms of SVMC, we're looking at all of those populations simultaneously and trying to see where are the needs. And so that kind of meshes a little bit with public health, which is what I mentioned my studies are in. And so the distinction between population health and public health is that public health really looks at what are the systems and situations that are causing those health outcomes that then population health takes a look at. So what does our infrastructure look like in our community? Do we have a lot of parks available for folks? Are the sidewalks walkable? Can you push a stroller down the sidewalk? Do people have access to food? So that's really sort of where those two different lines of study are related, but slightly different. And so in my position here, I'm able to kind of dabble in both realms, a little bit in the public health sphere, a little bit in the population health sphere. So I hope that gives kind of a broad overview. It's a little bit of a tricky subject. I spent 2 years in grad school studying this, and it's hard to boil down into a few minutes.
Still a moving target.
Right.
There has been, we often hear public health. And population health seems or sounds a little bit newer. What's kind of the evolution? So we've always had that public health, and it just seems just recently, within the last maybe decade, we've really started to talk about population health. I think of Dr. Dobson, who had his show earlier this week, and of course, the topic of conversation is population health. So where do you see how did we start to make those divisions or even just splinter off into population health world?
Sure. No, that's a really insightful question. So as you mentioned, public health has always kind of been in the lexicon of, what is your Department of Health doing in terms of vaccinations and things like that. And population health really is a newer term. And I think it's mainly driven by healthcare reform. So hospitals are realizing that, it's good to keep communities healthy and to have preventive measures in place so that acute care services really aren't so in demand. That helps us as a system with payment reform, so keeping folks healthy and out of our emergency department. If we can alleviate that suffering, alleviate spending, that's where we really need to dedicate our time. So I think it's been a slow transition, and it's still ongoing. But as I mentioned before, SVMC really is a thought leader in this area, looking at how do we keep people healthy in their homes and only needing occasional checkups. And obviously we're here for everyone when they need it. But the healthier we can keep folks, the better. So that's sort of a new evolution nationally and within our state. And that's why you're hearing the term population health come up more and more.
Great. And, obviously we're a chamber of commerce. We're big on small business, economic growth, along with community growth. And I always like to think of it as gears of a clock. One doesn't really work without the other. And then we can include all the other topics of housing and daycare and education. Population health, I think, fits within the one gear of those clocks that we need to focus on population health, especially the future of many of our residents. So talk to me, Rory, a little bit about why is population health important as we look to attract businesses for the region, retain employees, economic development. Obviously, I know you've worked a little bit in those fields, but what to you stands out as a reason why population health helps those things move along?
Right. That's a great question. So a lot of the time when we think of health, we think of clinical health, our trips to the doctor, what have you. But most of our time is spent working out with our families, living, working, playing, learning in our community, not in a doctor's office. And so the decisions and situations that dictate our health outcomes mainly occur out in the community. And so when we talk about what a healthy community looks like, we don't only mean physical health and health outcomes. Like you mentioned, we're also looking at the financial health of our region and then also the individuals that live within the region. And so by attracting employees and businesses to a healthy community, it's kind of this cyclical thing. So it can be hard to kind of imagine where to jump into the cycle, because a healthy community will draw in businesses and employees, but you have to start somewhere, right? So that's why SVMC is involved in so many sort of non-clinical initiatives. So you look at what other health systems are doing, and they're not all part of downtown redevelopment projects. They aren't all purchasing college campuses. So it kind of looks a little bit odd to the outsider, maybe that a hospital system would be so invested in non-clinical initiatives out in the community. But it's really looking at the region's financial well-being as the basis on which health is built. So we know that someone's wealth is really one of the main predictors of their health, whether that's personally. So if someone is not making a living wage, if they're burdened with a lot of debt, if they don't have the ability to pay for things that keep them healthy, they're not going to be well off. And so it is kind of this cycle where we need to on the front end sort of provide people with the means to have the wealth in order to be healthy. So that's a little bit of a roundabout answer, but we just, I think, picture financial health really as the basis on which everything else can spring off of.
Absolutely. And very well put. We, again, as a Chamber of Commerce, we'd be foolish not to be looking at some of the other parameters or other things that lead into a strong commerce. And part of that is a healthy community. And it's why we've always been a strong proponent. It's why we're launching ShiresHEALTH, because we believe so strongly in it. So we've got population health. We've kind of identified it or defined it. And then all of a sudden, this big, nasty COVID-19 comes along. How has COVID-19 affected our region's population health? And has it made us more focused? I mean, just even when you look at the strong communication, what SVMC has done over the last couple of years, as you mentioned, Rory, with downtown development and now purchase of SVC. But talk to us a little bit about COVID-19, a national, global pandemic. What does that do to population health?
Right. So I think you already touched on one thing that I want to highlight, and that's that it's kind of brought the idea of public health and population health into the forefront of people's minds when it normally isn't. So, when I was in school, I learned that the mark of a good public health practitioner is that no one knows the work that you're doing, because it's purely preventive and no one has any reason to even consider what you're working on. But a pandemic certainly kind of throws public health right into the forefront of everyone's mind. And so while it's certainly not a good thing to have to endure a year of a pandemic, I think one bright light that's coming out of this is that folks are really closely paying attention to the role that health has in everything, and in policy, in education. It's really at the basis for how we function as humans. And so the pandemic really has made people consider more thoughtfully how how things like COVID-19 might disproportionately impact different populations as well. So while it's been difficult for everyone, has it been more difficult for some? And those are important questions to look at, and then to try to mitigate those struggles for certain subpopulations. And then just speaking about the impact of COVID-19 in our region, we've held some of our community health needs assessment forums already. And resoundingly, what we're hearing is that the isolation has had such a detrimental impact, not only on youth who are out of school, but every generation really is struggling under the burden of feeling so isolated from friends and family and colleagues. And that has, significant ramifications for their mental health, both in the short term and then potentially in the long term. You think about a student who maybe was entering middle school at the start of the pandemic. At the end of this school year, 2 years will have gone by essentially, and they've kind of missed those middle school years. So that can have resounding impacts on their development. And so everyone's kind of taking a close look at how to kind of get ahead of some of those challenges that we know are coming that way. We've also heard that substance use has increased. And so when I say substance use, I don't just mean opioids. Alcohol use, tobacco use is up. And I think that kind of points to the stress of the past year and the coping mechanisms that people have kind of taken in order to feel okay. And so that's definitely something that we're looking at, the impacts of substance use, and then also just this long-term stress really isn't good for folks. And then just in general, sort of a lack of ability to do the behaviors that we might normally do in order to stay healthy. So exercising, eating well. When you're stressed, a lot of those things can go out the window, and then you kind of feel guilty about it. And it's just kind of this vicious cycle. So we've heard from a lot of folks that it's been difficult to stay healthy because you're just kind of exhausted at the end of the day, and maybe you don't want to cook a really healthy dinner. You just kind of want to go to sleep, watch TV. So I'm hoping that as we sort of slowly come out of COVID, that folks will be able to return to those behaviors and healthy coping mechanisms. But I know that we'll have significant challenges, particularly addressing the mental health ramifications of the pandemic.
Yeah, I've heard it often referred to or will be a tsunami of grief. Just the idea of the loss cycle. And you mentioned middle school years. We've heard, just with weddings or, even deaths, and not being able to say goodbye to that friend, that grandparent, that, there's been a lot of loss, and if we haven't dealt with it yet, and we will probably have a surge, maybe isn't the right word, but we'll be excited that spring is sprung and we're outside, but eventually we will have to process with the lost year. And I think you bring up really good points, Rory, around that. And we'll probably put in the comment bar there. I know we've had UCS on other shows before. They have a terrific hotline for challenges like this. And so let's try and put those in the comment bar. If people are experiencing depression or increased mental health issues, we do have resources right in our region. So please give them a call. I do want to also remind you, if you're watching on Facebook, welcome. This is the first show of hopefully many of ShiresHEALTH, where we take a look at some of the long-range health implications of the region. And so thank you for joining us. If you do have a question, I'm joined by Rory Price with Southwestern Vermont Medical Center, and we're going over population health today. And so if you do have a question for Rory or myself, leave it in the comment bar and we will get to it. So please leave a comment. Rory, before this, you had mentioned a community health assessment. So talk to us a little bit about, you had mentioned you had a couple meetings already, but in general, what is a community health needs assessment, and how is it shaping up for you?
Sure. So the community health needs assessment is a triennial process that's actually required by the IRS. This was something that was written into the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that all hospital systems who are nonprofits are required to kind of reach out to their community and see what the needs are. And so for an institution like SVMC, we don't view it as a box to check or some arduous requirement that we need to meet. It's really just such a privilege and an opportunity every 3 years to do a deep dive into what our community needs are. And so we have started the process. We've collected some early data. What the assessment does is it combines sort of those hard numbers from places like our Department of Health with sort of the anecdotes and stories from community members, and then also a community survey that looks at personal health outcomes and experiences. So by the end of this long process, we'll be able to take all of that input, all of that data, and kind of mesh it together into a comprehensive assessment that says, here are the needs that our communities are facing. And it doesn't stop there. So it's an assessment, but there's also this accompanying piece that's also really important, and that's called an implementation plan. So it's not enough just to say, here are the needs. Good luck, everyone. We also put together a plan to address those needs and incorporate community partnerships, different collaborations to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. Because I will say some of the things that come up aren't things the SVMC can unilaterally address. But I think that we've managed to build around us a group of incredible stakeholders. We're so fortunate to live in this community with so many deeply passionate and involved organizations at our side. So we put together a plan about how we'll address community health needs. So we've done that through some forums. We've had 3 so far, and we have 2 remaining, one of which is tonight for the Northern Berkshire region, and Bennington's is next week. And so really what those forums do is it's sort of an open dialogue. I have some questions that I ask to prompt discussion, but folks are able to really candidly share what they're feeling and what they see their neighbors struggling with, what they might be struggling with personally. And we take that, and at the end of the night for each session, we vote about what are your top 3 needs that after all of this discussion that you feel SVMC and other community partners should be focusing on addressing.
Are you seeing any trends so far?
We are. So I don't want to
talk about those yet.
Yeah, I don't want to preempt the results, but mental health has been a resounding need that folks are facing. So whether that's access to clinicians or practitioners at the time that they need them, or in the way that they need them, or just in general feeling like they are uncomfortable accessing those services. I know, despite the incredible efforts of UCS, there is still this stigma attached to seeking assistance for mental health care. And, folks are bringing that up, that even if they need help, it's difficult to take that step. And so the more we can do to help with that, the better. Housing, affordable housing has come up, I think, in every forum that we've had. And that certainly ties to the economic health of the region. So how do you attract and retain businesses and workers if housing isn't affordable or in the right location for them? And so I know there's efforts underway, but that's been a pattern, a need that's been brought up. Similarly, social gathering spots. So while COVID hasn't really allowed for that, I think everyone's sort of forecasting ahead over the next couple of years that having places for multi-generational gatherings, whether that's a community center or a drop-in center, is really imperative. And so that has also come up in these forums.
Great. Thanks. And I'm sure more come up. Those are the top 3. And that's not something completely new to many people, I'm sure, watching. They can probably shake their heads right now watching and going, yeah, those are the 3 that I would come up with. When we look at those 3, Rory, I'm trying to think of, you do this every 3 years, and how long have we been doing this as a region?
Right.
How many?
We started in 2012. So we've done an assessment in 2012, 2015, and the most recent one was 2018.
And not to put you completely on the spot, but if you've looked at those in the past, are we seeing any trends as we do comparison data from one to the other, or things, as we just mentioned, that are emerging now in your current one that we didn't even foresee in 2012?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Our most recent assessment found the top needs were mental health and substance use, access to care as sort of a broad category of access to specialists, but also access to primary care and mental health practitioners. And then finally, obesity and healthy behaviors. So the ability to carry out healthy behaviors that prevent obesity. And so what we're seeing, that was what was found in 2018, and it was similar in 2015 and similar in 2012, which I think has the potential to feel a little bit despairing, that we're seeing the same needs come up over and over again. But I will say that we've taken great strides to address the needs that we've heard, and these are such complex, interlinked topics that we're finding. So while the findings this year might very well reflect similar assessments done in the past, I think there's also a lot to celebrate in terms of additions to service lines and things that have been added for these topics.
Is there a way to measure that? And I'm almost thinking, and I'm sure it'd be tough to gather kind of the scorecard is what I'm thinking of. So yes, these are still an issue. However, based on 2012 to 2020, 2021, have we moved the needle at all? So whether it's a dashboard or even a rubric of some kind, is there ever any way to say, we know there's still problems. However, look at just even what SVMC with its partners have done in the last 5 years, whether that be the Putnam, the housing remodel program for doctors, or what they're doing with SVC right now. So I'd hate to have all those efforts go unchecked. So anything in the reports that we can kind of comparably measure that we're getting better at?
Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. It's so difficult sometimes to work with some of this data. So SVMC serves 5 counties across 3 states, and each of the 3 states has a different way for collecting data. They ask questions on different surveys at different times on a different schedule. So it can be hard to kind of scientifically look down and compare results across all states and counties. But in terms of our own individual efforts, we have a number of metrics that we look at specifically for things like access to care. How are our practices doing in terms of bringing in new patients? How are we doing for physician recruitment? So for some things, you really can put a number on it, and that helps to keep us kind of feeling optimistic that we are making strides and making an impact. So that's the type of number that folks can expect from our community health needs assessment. We do reference the previous assessment and say, here's what we found last year, here's what we said we're going to do, and here's what we were able to do, and here's what we'll continue to do. If we found that something was particularly successful, maybe we should amplify that effort. Or if something didn't really work out, then let's redirect and find better places to put our resources and time and energy. So that is, the assessment will really kind of spell out how we are addressing the needs that have been identified, not only this year, but in previous years.
Remind us again, Rory, when do you finish this assessment and when does it get released?
Sure. So it'll be finished probably towards the end of next month, mid to late May. And this assessment, I'm really happy to say it goes to our board for approval. And so they look at it and, are able to kind of give some feedback in terms of what they've heard in their community, their expert knowledge in the field. And then they adopt the final document. And so that really is a testament to how seriously SVMC takes this process and our action plan for going forward. So that can be expected to happen in late summer to early fall. And one of the key things that we're required to do, that we're happy to do, is to widely share that document when it's been adopted and approved by our board. And so that'll be available on our website and in a number of different ways, so that folks can access that information and see what we found.
Something I didn't hear in the top 3, although it's probably all interlocked as been kind of the theme we've been talking about. Everything seems to be interlocked, but what I'm hearing a lot of is one end of the spectrum, not so much the other end, but I can imagine it's there as well, which is around beginning of life and end of life. And so I have to imagine that that is a huge thing in population health. Beginning of life being around really around daycare is probably the most strongest need I've heard in the last couple of years. Daycare, pre-K, and then on into universal education. Match that with just in general, we know the population is getting older, not just in Vermont, but all baby boomers. That massive generation is turning 70 and will soon turn 80. And we know that there's going to be a huge wave of an older generation that will eventually, need end of life care. Is that coming up at all? Or what are your thoughts on that as we look at two ends of the spectrum there?
So I'll start with the child care aspect, because that certainly has come up in our forums. Affordable, safe, reliable childcare is certainly something that a lot of families are struggling to find. And that just ties into what the other things that we've talked about. If you're not able to find childcare and you're not able to work, what does that do for the financial situation for your own family? And if you multiply that across many families, what is that doing to our region? So that is really such a key component of health that I think with COVID has been kind of put in the spotlight, that, if your child is at home doing schoolwork, who is taking care of them, the child care aspect of this has really been quite surprising to a lot of folks. And I know that Vermont is taking a hard look at that. We do have a lot of really world-class childcare centers in our county and in our state. And so how do we kind of begin to multiply those to make it something that's available to everyone across the socioeconomic spectrum? So yes, that has definitely come up in our forums, and I would anticipate that it would continue to come up both in our survey results and our remaining forums. End of life care has not come up in our conversations, and I think that that's probably not a huge surprise. It's not the happiest topic to speak about. It's not something that's typically on the forefront of someone's mind. And that's okay. But I think that it is possible to have a really honest discussion about end of life care. And it's better to do it ahead of time so that you know what you want and everyone else knows what you want as well. So that is something that sort of within our hospital walls, we're taking a look at. What do our patients know about end of life care and palliative care and hospice care and the distinctions between all of them? I know that there's a lot of misconceptions, which can be harmful. I know within my own family, when a family member was sort of placed into hospice care, that one of my family members was so upset, saying, well, now they're not going to give her any water and they're just going to let her die. And that's certainly not the key. That's not the case. It's a measure of comfort hospice care and palliative care provide, and it's not what some folks imagine it to be. But it's hard to have those conversations with folks because it's such a deeply emotional and personal topic. And so while our forums haven't touched on that, our data certainly has. And so even if a topic like that isn't brought up in our community forums or addressed in the survey, our data certainly will be included in the community health needs assessment document and our implementation plan.
Right. Well, I don't think we could do a medical show, a health show, without mentioning COVID and COVID registrations. And Rory, again, not to put you on the spot, but just remind our audience, if they're watching, where we're at in terms of the bans and when people can register and how they're registering, and perhaps even how the whole process is going just from a SVMC perspective, from a regional perspective.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that the rollout has been relatively smooth. I think that, there's been individual glitches in terms of registrations, and that's to be expected. This is a whole new process for everyone involved. I think we're down to, in 18 days, everyone over the age of 16 will be eligible for vaccination. So that's kind of right around the corner and really exciting. Right now, we are still on the higher age bands, and then also individuals who have particular conditions that might make them more at risk for complications from COVID-19. But soon it will be open to everyone. I know that our teachers have had some clinics dedicated to them, and that those have gone really smoothly, and they were very thankful for those. Our healthcare workers are also all eligible as well, and are certainly availing themselves of that. I think SBMC's workforce has done a wonderful job, because you look around and across the country, there is certainly vaccine hesitancy, and we're not immune to that in our region. But I think the SBMC and our Department of Health has done a wonderful job in terms of being very transparent with the vaccine development process, the rollout, why decisions are made the way that they are. And I think that we're also fortunate to live in a community that asks questions about, well, why this group and not that group? That everyone has their attention turned to that and is looking out for each other. So I think that's been
which was going to be one of my next questions. And again, maybe you have the answer, or maybe some of the answer, but BIPOC communities are just opening, I believe, today or yesterday. And so I think this dovetails into population health a little bit. And so talk to us from your expertise, why BIPOC? Why that? And again, we could talk about teachers, we could talk about age bands. There are, I leave it to the people smarter than me to figure those things out. And I'm sure there's a reason here too, but I know it's important for our community to lean in and have those conversations like you were saying, Rory. So any of your expertise on the BIPOC community and vaccination?
Sure. Yeah. So you asked the question sort of why the BIPOC community, why would they be prioritized? If you look at the numbers, so if you take just a deeply scientific look at who has been diagnosed with COVID, who has been hospitalized, and who has passed away from COVID-19, the BIPOC population, so that stands for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, has been disproportionately burdened by disease and death. And so that kind of ties into what we've talked about with population health, looking at why would a particular subpopulation be more impacted by this disease? And it ties into all of the things that we've mentioned, whether socioeconomics, opportunities, and if they're presented equitably, transportation, it just all ties in. And so to offer vaccination a little bit earlier for this group it's rooted in science that these folks maybe are at higher risk of complications. And so we want to prioritize anyone who's at increased risk. And so that's why those decisions are being made. And in terms of vaccine hesitancy, there is a long history in the United States. Unfortunately, the public health field has not always made the right decisions. And so there have been, medical experiments and things that have not, been part of the public health sort of ethical body. It should not have happened, and those ramifications from those things are still reverberating throughout our nation. So while hesitancy is certainly understandable, I'm really hopeful that we can kind of have those conversations and build those connections so that everyone who needs to get vaccinated will.
Great. Rory, a couple final questions here. And again, I want to remind people watching on Facebook, you still have time to get your questions in. But as we start to wind down those questions, I have just a couple left for you. We kind of detoured from the community health assessment, but I want to bring us back to how the community can participate and how the community can help you. So tell us, how can the community participate? You had mentioned that there's a Bennington program coming up soon, and how can we help?
Sure. Yeah. So tonight we have a forum for the residents of the Northern Berkshire area. So that might not apply to a lot of our listeners here, but that forum is at 6 p.m. tonight over Zoom. The one that most folks would be interested in is happening on April 6th, and that's our Bennington Forum. So that one's also at 6 p.m. via Zoom, and folks can register on our website, which is sbhealthcare.org. And those forums are really taking a wide look at what are the community needs, what are you seeing in the schools, in your workplace, with your neighbors, obviously not naming names, but just in general, what trends are folks seeing? There's also a survey that we've launched, and that can also be found on our website. And the survey dovetails with the forums in that it asks a little bit more specifically about the individual experience of the respondent. And so it asks sort of what personal health struggles have they had? If they could wave a magic wand and change one aspect of healthcare in their community, what would it be? So those are two ways that folks can get involved, is to attend a forum and or take a survey. And if neither of those options appeal, folks can always reach out to me. I've had some really great one-on-one discussions with people who felt like, their feedback wasn't really appropriate for a forum and didn't fit into the survey. So I'm always available for that type of dialogue. And they can reach out to me via email, rory.price@svhealthcare.org. And I'll make sure that we get in touch and that their feedback is heard and incorporated into our assessment.
Great. Thanks, Rory. Final question for me. Let's take that magic wand concept. Let's put you in a hot air balloon. You're looking down at southwestern Vermont, the region, 10 years from now, from a hot air balloon. Population health. You've done a terrific job. You wave your magic wand. What does it look like? What does southwestern Vermont look like in 10 years to you?
Oh, that's such a nice question, and I hope it comes true. So check back in a decade.
I will.
But what I would see is a vibrant community where everyone has the opportunity to be healthy. And so that is kind of a broad statement, but it means that folks will have access to positions with a wage that allows them a good, quality of life, that they have access to the healthcare that they need, and that they don't need to access healthcare super frequently because they're able to carry out healthy behaviors in their life that keeps them out of our emergency room and keeps them doing the things that they love. So that's what I would hope to see. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but also working really hard to make that come true.
Say, not only just luck, but a lot of hard work, it sounds like.
And I know, I'm part of a wonderful team here at SVMC of people who are deeply committed to making that vision come true, hopefully sooner than in 10 years. And that's this survey, I think, will help to guide that process and show us where we should be paying the most attention.
Great. Again, Rory, I want to thank you. Rory Price is SVMC's coordinator of population health. She's putting out a current health needs of the region. And again, Rory, I just want to thank you for taking some time out on this Thursday to speak with our members and speak with the community at large, and hope you have a great weekend.
Great. Thank you, Matt. You too.
Bye.